Luntz is a poster, a New York Times bestselling author, and a frequent commentator and analyst for the Fox News Channel and CBS News during this busy political season. With just 1 week before the political primary season begins, he joins us to talk about the latest findings from his group's focus polls. Frank, good to have you on this program as always.
It's a pleasure.
We're going to talk politics in Iowa and New Hampshire in just a second, and for that matter, the rest of the country. But since we sit in Hollywood, and the big story, as you well know, is...
You make me so comfortable at the beginning. Since a conservative having to talk about Hollywood.
Since we are in Hollywood, and the major story, of course, is the whiteout. The all-white nominees at this year's Academy Awards. Let me ask you this.
Did they lose your nomination?
Yeah, please. Let me ask you this. If you're a communication specialist, you've helped do damage control, you advise people. If you were advising the Academy on this whiteout, what would you say to them amidst the fact that we are now hearing rumors that they're looking for black actors, A-listers, to now present at the awards, since Negroes couldn't get nominated, now they want black folks to show up and present awards. But what would you be advising them to do in this moment?
Could be worse. It could be the seat sitters, so you put them in the audience. So it's, clearly we're integrated. Just look at our crowd shots here. It's amusing to me because politically, internally, in terms of who I am, I'm a little right of center, not that far right of center. The only people who are discriminated against in Hollywood aren't African Americans. It's conservatives.
Oh, come on.
The only people who can't get jobs are conservatives. The only people who get condemned are conservatives. You're telling me that you would rather be conservative than black in Hollywood?
First
really?
Let me dismiss this nonsense right quick, and then we'll get back to the seriousness of my question.
You can't get a job.
Kevin Costner
is not a conservative.
Kevin Costner,
ask him.
He's a Republican.
Kevin Costner voted for Barack Obama. I've asked him.
He's a Republican, though.
He voted for Barack Obama.
A lot of people did.
He's not a Republican.
Kevin Costner's politics.
25 years ago. You got to talk to him now.
Arnold Schwarzenegger was the governor of this state.
Oh, one.
No.
You just named one.
No. What's
You should name the second one.
The father of Angelina Jolie's father.
Who?
Angelina Jolie's father.
Oh,
John Voight.
Okay, you named two.
Oh, come on. The point is, there are Republicans. People can choose to be what they want to be.
Would you
but you can't make the point that Republicans don't get work.
Is there more discrimination if you're a conservative, if you're gay, or if you're black? Answer that question.
I'm not going to answer that. Here's why. Because you're trying to make it about more or less.
But it shouldn't be about any of it.
You're trying to make it about more or less when it's really about right and wrong.
Correct.
It's not about more or less. It's about right and wrong.
And so
on the question that I asked, what would you advise the Academy to do in this moment?
There should be no discrimination. There should be no tokenism. There should be no preference. It should be based on performance.
Okay, but
good or bad. We agree. Based on performance.
We agree. But they've gotten themselves in a pickle now. What do you tell them?
I tell them to send everyone to the Tonys because they don't have this issue. At least one person laughed.
All right.
What would you tell them? What would you tell them?
Well, there's an answer to that question. I wrote a piece for USA Today. Go to USA Today and you can see what.
No, but teach me.
It's a much longer story. The short answer is that this is what we're talking about now is the end game, and it's not just about the end game. It's not about who gets nominated when all the work has been done. It's really about who gets to work in the first place, who gets to pick the scripts, who gets to pick the talent, who gets to greenlight the projects. And if we're going to talk just about the end game, then we're missing the point, number one, since you asked. Number two, why is it over the last 10 years, I make this argument, gays and lesbians, the LGBT community, has gained more ground in the last decade than black folk have gained in this town in the last 50 years. Now, I don't begrudge anybody. You know me. I'm all for it. Let me be very clear about this. I'm all for expanding rights and opportunities for all. But what is it about black folk in this industry that they can't cover the kind of ground in a half a century that the gays and lesbians have covered in a decade? That's problematic.
But it's not just Hollywood. It's not just Hollywood. In politics, the improvement in the black community has been significant. When you look at the mayors who've been elected, look at the members of Congress, there's influence there. But in just about every other way, and it's something that you wrote about, courageously wrote about, that even with the first African-American president, there still haven't been the gains in the economic community. And it all goes back to family. It goes back to culture. It goes back to society. And this is very troubling for me, and it's made it very hard for me increasingly hard over the last few years to see these communities where year after year, decade after decade, more and more programs, more and more money is spent and nothing happens. That you look at some of these cities and you see tremendous economic growth and opportunity. Just look at what has happened in New York. In the black neighborhoods and in the Latino neighborhoods in New York City, you saw a significant change over 20 years. But you didn't see that change in a place like Chicago. And I think in the end, and it's not enough. By the way, the Republicans got it wrong because they talk about personal responsibility. How can you teach responsibility when the child has no parents at home? Not a mom, not a dad, but not a mom, nobody. And it's not just about pulling yourself up by your bootstraps. It doesn't work if you have no role model to teach you what pulling yourself up really means. And on the Democratic side, you can't just keep shoving program after program or claiming that if you're against spending more money, then that makes you racist or that makes you unkind and uncaring. Both sides have failed. Mentoring is the process. Education becomes a success story, and we're not doing enough.
Okay, if we put a footnote on this academy thing, and I'll come back to that point in just a second. One of the things I want to make very quickly here, and this is a message to my own community, the African American community. We got to be very careful, as I write in this USA Today piece. We have to be very careful about how we're defining being snubbed by the academy. The question is very simply this: if black folk are snubbed when they don't get nominated, what are they when they win? So you got to be careful that you don't make mediocre the new excellence. We don't want mediocrity just for the sake of having black nominees.
And you don't want someone to say, "Oh, well, there's the black nominee. That's the slate for the black nominee, and the rest of the people to qualify." You don't want. Bill Cosby did not become the greatest. I know all the other stuff around him.
Sure.
He didn't become the greatest comedian because he was black. He became the greatest comedian because he could sit in a chair and entertain people the way nobody else could, in a chair, without any prop, without any bad language. He could tell stories for 2 hours that just blew people away and made them laugh. Oprah Winfrey did not become the greatest talk show host in American television history because she was the female Phil Donahue or the black Phil Donahue. She did it on her own. Colin Powell did not become the top general or the top diplomat in this country because of his race. He did so because of his merit. And I'm always afraid that in the effort to right a wrong, you will end up creating just as bad a problem.
I take that point, but here's the response, I think, to that. What you've just listed are individuals. They're great individuals, don't get me wrong. So black folk have had individual success. We are allowed to have individual success, but not collective success.
Which is you use the word allowed. That's not what it is.
No, I meant that word deliberately. I meant that deliberately because if the academy can't accept the fact that excellence comes in all colors, but we can have a person here or there on any given year, but writ large, we can't be involved consistently in being celebrated for the best work that we turn in, that's a problem. So they can celebrate individual success, but writ large, it's too spotty.
But you use the word allowed, and that suggests that there are others who are preventing you from that opportunity.
Therefore, who control your destiny. That's a fact.
But if you are a better director, if you're a more marketable director, you will get the money. If you are a more marketable star, you will get the money. In Hollywood, the truth is in Hollywood, they don't chase quality. They chase dollars. And if you're the one who's constantly producing the movies that sell, if you are either a performer or a writer or a director or a producer or even all the way up to studio head, if you are financially successful, you will be
But you have to be given a chance to be financially successful.
It's just strange
and
to
that's
me.
the point.
But this whole conversation is strange to me because Hollywood is left. It just is.
No,
and to have this conversation.
No, you're making my point. I told you.
It's amazing
Here we agree. But I make this point, though, and I think you're right about it. We agree on this. That Hollywood is, I was thinking about this the other day, and maybe my conservative friends would say the media. I don't buy that nonsense. But Hollywood is the most liberal, the most progressive institution in the country. Conservatives might say the media. They might say education, academia, but I think Hollywood is the most liberal institution in this country, and it pains me that an institution this liberal and this progressive cannot figure out this problem.
And here's the amazing thing. Progressive in the way that it used to mean. The most progressive institution in this country is actually the military. For how the military treats people.
They've advanced farther, yes.
For the opportunities that it gives people for a new chance, a new beginning, no matter where you come from. The military does more for people than any other institution in the country, and yet it's considered right-wing. Hollywood does far less for people than you would expect it to do, and yet it's left-wing.
Okay.
Go figure.
Back to the politics of the country versus the politics of Hollywood. So you laid out a wonderful dissertation earlier about how the left and right both get it wrong, and I agree at times they both do. But how is Donald Trump the answer?
Donald Trump is the antidote to Barack Obama for millions of Americans who feel that Obama led this country in the wrong direction, who feel like the last 7 years have not been successful. Obama is smooth. Trump is edgy. Obama is sophisticated. Trump is guttural. Obama's intellectual. Trump speaks from the gut, just very straightforward. And for millions of Americans, that's awesome because they're tired of their politicians who use amazing words and either do nothing or do things that are harmful to them. Trump is the exact opposite of what Barack Obama is, and that's exactly why millions of Americans love him.
I saw a piece this week in the New York Times, and the writer suggested that the way to defeat Trump is to not talk about his ideas, about his statements and words, but to go after the man, essentially who he is, go after his brand, what he represents. Because billionaire did not work for Mitt Romney. In an era where people were wanting more and the recession was squeezing, the Romney profile didn't work. Could Trump be defeated if you go not after his words and after his speeches, but after his profile, that billionaire profile?
Well, I have to ask you the question, why would you focus on Trump being defeated rather than Hillary Clinton? But if the question is Trump, then the only way to defeat him at this point is if his personal life is different than his public life. If what he says about respecting hardworking Americans is different than what he did as CEO of his company, did he treat people well? Did he pay for the work that they did? Did he build small businesses that went to work for the Trump company? If people benefited from him, then he's going to be fine.
But his personal life is different in the sense that he's gone after immigrants, but he married 2 of them.
Well, actually, I thought all 3 wives were immigrants, which is, by the way, living proof that there are some jobs only an immigrant will do. Perfect setup. I wanted to get that joke in here.
You got your joke in. But that is an inconsistency, is it not?
Because there's a right way and a wrong way to come to this country. And by the way, the reason why Trump connects is because it is very basic and very simple. But for millions of Americans, that's what they're waiting for. You don't break the law when you come to America. You don't break the law, or when you're engaging in trade with a foreign country, negotiating with a foreign country, you try to win for America, not for everybody else. Everything that Trump says is very simple and very clear, and to a majority of Americans, all Americans, not just Republicans, if you take out Donald Trump and you read those words, a majority of Americans agree with most of the things that Donald Trump says. And the reason why is that he's the closest thing to common sense. I'm not defending him. I don't choose any candidate to support. But he is so grounded, and Bernie Sanders is the same thing. You now have, among people under age 30, more people who believe in the compassion of socialism than they do capitalism. You now have people under the age 40 who believe that corporations have essentially screwed the American worker. So Sanders is appealing to the left of center group who's just fed up with corporate America and Washington. And Trump, who's appealing to right of center, who's just fed up with everything that's going on in America today. And that's why Sanders is the oldest candidate ever. I'm convinced that Sanders was actually at Abraham Lincoln's inaugural address. So you got Sanders on one side, you got Trump on the other, and they are pulling people, and that's why they're both doing so well.
So 2 months ago, maybe even a month ago, none would have betted, maybe you since you're the expert pollster, but I certainly would not have thought a month or so ago that we might have a Republican nominee before we have a Democratic nominee. What do you make of the way that thing turned?
I still think Hillary Clinton gets a nomination because Democrats in the end, mainstream Democrats, while they like where Bernie Sanders stands and they like him as a person, in the end they say Hillary Clinton is more electable and more experienced. I think the Democratic nomination, I don't believe that she has it wrapped up until April, and I don't think the Republicans have their election wrapped up until May. And if you ask me to tell you who's going to win on the Republican side, I can't. It's just too close.
What do you make of the fact that in 2008, Hillary Clinton gets blindsided by a young black guy from her left? And in 2016, she's blindsided by an old white guy from her left. What do you make of that?
And I figured that would be Bill Clinton would beat both those people, but they weren't.
Yeah.
Bernie Sanders is so old it takes him an hour and a half to watch 60 Minutes.
Yeah.
I mean, that's how old he is. Bernie Sanders' favorite painting is The Last Supper. He's the second waiter from the left. Tip your waitress as well.
Yeah.
He really, I love his, I got to admit it.
Yeah.
I love his audiences. I'm going to Iowa in a few days. I'm going to stay there for 5. I'm going to be up in New Hampshire. I love going to Bernie Sanders rallies.
Why?
Because everyone is so excited. Everyone is so energized. They're so engaged. And it's not an anger. The Trump rallies are anger rallies because they're mad at the conditions of the country. Sanders, the rallies are passionate, but short of that same kind of anger. And people are so into it. And here are 23-year-olds screaming and hollering like he's a Beatle to a guy who's actually older than the Beatles. It's amazing to me.
We've heard for years this notion of the angry black male. In our politics, it's really the angry white male. You've made that point 2 or 3 times. What are white men so angry about? What do y'all have to be angry about?
It's a sense of betrayal.
By who? Barack Obama? He's been there for like...
By the system itself, by the institutions. You were taught that if you worked hard and played by the rules, raised your family, went to church, held a job, and gave back to the community, things would work out for you.
By that standard, black folks should be livid. And you give me a speech about why white men are angry about that?
But the whole point is that we now think white-black. And we used to think white-black in the 60s and 70s. I look at what's happening in these cities. I look at Chicago. My God, Chicago was truly coming back as a city. And it is in a worse condition today. People are more angry. It is more violent. There's more crime committed in Chicago than there has ever been. And I understand I get it, that they feel that there's no hope, that they feel that the system is broken. The black man feels that the police don't protect them, they abuse them. The white man feels that the people in Washington and Wall Street lied to them and betrayed them about the future. The truth is that there's more in America that should unite us than at any time that I can remember. We all agree on so many policies. Don't spend more money than you have. Don't tax people who are already working as hard as they possibly can. Let people make decisions in their own lives without interference from others.
But to make that work,
we agree on this. Yeah. We should not be as divided as we are. And the problem with politics is that it is enforcing that division. It is actually causing it.
Okay.
It's pouring salt in it. And that's what drives me. As a pollster, it makes it hard to function.
So to make that work, you just laid out, you know, a nice campaign strategy. To make that work, you need someone who is a uniter and not a divider. Now we hear that Michael Bloomberg, former mayor of New York, may spend, his friends are suggesting, he's told them he may spend up to $1 billion of his own money if he decides to be a third-party candidate. Can he have any appreciable impact if he gets in the race?
I worked for him years ago.
Right.
He's one of the smartest people I've ever worked with. He's a realist, and he's a get-things-done kind of guy. He was a very good mayor for New York. He took all the changes that Rudy Giuliani brought, and he institutionalized them. He made them permanent, so it's very hard to undo it. And
he ran one term too many, though.
It took the extra 4 years to ensure that those changes would not go back if you had politicians and bureaucrats who didn't share the same beliefs that he and Giuliani shared. So I don't agree with that. I know that voters got a little bit tired of him, but they get tired of people after 8 years. I don't care whether you're tired of a politician if they're doing a good job.
Can he have an impact if he gets in this race?
Yes, because there's a segment of society, and I'm not quite sure how it is, how big it is. I think it's about 25%, who's economically conservative and socially liberal. Economically, they can't stand what Hillary Clinton wants to do, all these new programs and taxes and spending and debt. They can't deal with the Republicans on issues of abortion or guns or marijuana or whatever. And so they take in essence, a centrist approach on all of that. And if the Republican nominee is either Cruz or Trump, there will be a segment that will be looking for someone in the center. If the Democratic nominee is either of those two candidates, they're too far to the left of so many Americans.
So I get that campaigning is not governing, and yet you have to use words that work. I heard a great writer once suggest you have to have words that work to campaign successfully and to govern successfully. So based upon what your data tells you, your polling data, what would be the words that work this time around?
Well, the problem is that they're two separate lexicons now.
Right.
And the problem is that they're two separate beliefs. The fact that you asked me that question, and it is the most important question of all, is what's wrong, is that we are in permanent campaigning rather than in permanent governing. And because of what I do, I don't just poll. I go out and I listen to voters, and they tell me what they're so afraid of. They believe the American dream is dead. They believe that the opportunity that their parents had, they won't. And they fundamentally believe that their children will have a worse quality of life than them. These are things that make them really angry, anxious, just agitated about the future. We want common sense. We want people who look at a problem and solve it, not for ideological purposes, but to actually just solve it, to get it done. So number one is common sense. Number two is accountability. These politicians, they say anything they want to say when they're running, and then they do exactly the opposite. So we want someone who holds himself accountable. Number three is efficient and effective. We want to know that if you've had to do more with less, so should government. And effective is if you can't get it done right, then don't do it at all. So efficient and effective. We also want results. We want to know that these aren't just promises, that you're actually going to get it done. That's the language that both is good for politics and good for governing.
We were together in New York a couple weeks ago, and after a meeting we were at together, you asked me if I had time the next day to come meet some young guys that you were working with, that you were mentoring. And I found time to schedule, of course, to do that because you asked me. But I found time to do it because you said they were young African-American men. And I'm like, what is Frank Luntz doing with these young black guys, and why do they want to meet me? It was one of the great gatherings of my life to spend a couple hours with those young brothers over lunch. But tell me more about how you met these young guys, how you're mentoring these young African-American males. I mean, just tell me more about your work on that.
For you doing this, you're a special guy. I know that my philosophy isn't working. And I'm going to do this and try not to get emotional.
Sure.
I know that telling people to pull themselves up, they can't if there's not even a single adult in their family. And I know that buy them off of government programs has failed. So I met these two, and I don't know whether to call them two black men or African Americans. I want to do it right, and my fear is that I'll do it wrong. I met these two guys while I was having dinner with Kevin McCarthy, the majority leader. And I was instigated. They wanted to get into our conversation. I didn't want them in because I just wanted to talk to Kevin. But they were sharp and they were funny. And I asked them what their background was. And one of them, his parents were so young when they had him. And another one lost his father through a violent act. And I was so blown away by how articulate they were, but more importantly, how optimistic they were. So they brought together another group, and Georgetown deserves tremendous credit for this. That school is taking young men and young women from the most horrible conditions, sometimes where there isn't a single adult anywhere, sometimes where they're the only student who goes out of that city or that state to college. And they introduced me to dozens of people who are just like them. They went up to Capitol Hill, and they actually started talking to Republican and Democratic members of Congress, explaining their challenges. And through both good projects and good work, these four young men are going to change their communities. And they're going to go back to where they came from. So often I hear from an African-American leader, I wanted to get out. I wanted to get out of the neighborhood. I wanted to get out of the crime and all that. These guys are going back in. And through reading programs, through sports programs, all four of them play for the Georgetown football team. The reason why I needed you to meet them is, in the end, I'm still white. I don't like to see color, but they do. We all do. You were an inspiration to them because you told them the truth about what they needed to do. And through the company's called Good Projects, they're going to prove that a few individuals with dedication, commitment, common sense, and passion can make a difference in the lives of the community.
15 seconds. You've done the data. Know this. What do you make of the fact that over the last 10 years, black folk have caught the most hell, politically, economically, socially, culturally, and yet to these young brothers, black people writ large, are still the most optimistic, still the most hopeful? What do you make of that?
Number one is that they were grateful that this country was willing to elect an African American, and so they believe that you can champion over racism. Number two is that they believe that with a little bit of luck and a little bit of help, and with good common sense and work, you can still achieve the American dream in this country. And number three, they fundamentally believe that the promise of America is still alive. And that's the only thing that gives me hope.
We always have great conversations. Good to have you on, Frank.
Thank you.
Good to see you. That's our show tonight.